Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to talk about getting it right the first time with Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP using NetApp Workload Factory. To guide us through the process, we've got Robert Bell, who's a product enablement specialist. While the session takes place, you can ask questions in the chat, and we have a very special chat responder today, Aviv Degani, who is a manager of the product solutions architect team. And by the way, if you are planning to visit a reInvent this year, Aviv is going to be there, so make sure to drop by and say hello. And last but not least, my name is Danny, and I'm also a product enablement specialist here at NetApp. And we're going to talk about getting it right the first time with FSx for ONTAP. Robert, when you're ready, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Danny. And thank you all for joining. This is going to be a short session about something that I think is often overlooked when it comes to deploying products on AWS. So I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP, but just as a reminder for those who might not be 100% familiar, we're talking about an AWS storage service that is designed to provide intelligent storage for workloads on AWS. And it's a storage service, but it has a great deal of features inside the storage layer. The reason it has so many features is because it's based on a system called ONTAP, which is developed by NetApp. And it's a service, or I would say a storage operating system that is designed to optimize storage. And it's been around for many years, in fact, many decades, constantly evolving and being adapted to new needs. Now, this system was deployed in or implemented in AWS as an AWS native service, and it provides all of the features that this system has provided for data centers for many years. So these features really cover different areas around the ability to access the data in different formats, the protection of the data, which is inherent to the storage, and security to protect against ransomware and cyber threats. And then there is also the optimizing of both the cost and the performance. And then finally, there is the ability to move the data around when it's necessary. So it's really a large amount of features, and this is something that is very useful in many different cases and can actually allow you to adapt the storage to your specific workloads. But having a lot of features is one thing. What's more important is really knowing how to use these features. So this is what we're going to talk about in this session. And before I go into the details, we want you to participate a little bit just to give us an idea of how familiar you are with the topics we're going to be talking about. So we'd like to start with a poll. So you'll see a question appear on your screen, and you can choose the answer that's most suitable for you, and then we will address that in the rest of the session. We want to really customize it to the knowledge that you have and the requirements you have. So this question is about familiarity with AWS well-architected framework. So I'm sure that this is something that a lot of you have at least heard of, but we want to really get an idea of how familiar you are with this.
So I believe, Robert, my guess is that we're going to see the results that people are at least somewhat familiar with it, since it is quite common, especially when you're getting your first steps in AWS. If you're working with a third-party vendor or with an AWS solutions architect, they always like to build it according to the well-architected principles. And I do believe that we're going to see that in the results. And
Yeah, the
Liat
results
is
are in.
our producer is paging me that the results are in. So would you like to do the honors in reading the results, or should I
Yeah.
do it?
No, go ahead. And I think that
Okay.
you were right with your estimation. So
So the question was, how familiar are you with the AWS well-architected framework? So 64% says they at least heard of it. 16% said that they're well versed in it. So we've got an 80% altogether of the attendance at least heard about it, know about it. And 20% are not familiar with it, but it doesn't mean necessarily that they haven't heard of it. Maybe they have some vague clue. So I think for that, Robert, I think it would be a good idea if you take a few minutes to explain what is it, what are the parts, and how it relates to our topic today.
yeah, well, I'm glad that the majority of people have heard of it, because I think this is really a key part of working with AWS. If you're building an AWS, developing, you've got to build the infrastructure, you've got to build the workloads. And AWS have done an amazing job by putting together a set of best practices which are specifically designed to optimize workloads. And they address the different areas that are important to basically to everyone who is deploying in AWS, which are security, operational excellence, reliability, performance, sustainability, and cost efficiency. I'm going to be touching this quite lightly because we don't have a lot of time here, but I do encourage everyone who wants to learn more about it to go on to just Google AWS well-architected framework. There's a lot of really good resources that really provide the details of these best practices. And it's something that you can actually look into this and get ideas if you're planning, building, or operating workloads on AWS. But I want to talk about it in the context of FSx for ONTAP, because this is really something which is very relevant to Workload Factory. So if we look at these different areas, and there we go. This would involve choosing the right resources for the optimal cost performance. That's really sort of like if I put all of these thousands of different best practices into a very, very simple in a nutshell, it would be optimizing cost performance by choosing the right resources, but also applying the mechanisms for automatically keeping these resources available and protected. So these are two areas that really, I think, most of the recommendations or the best practices focus on. And really, I'm oversimplifying it. Obviously, it's much more complicated than this. But if we do think of these are our two goals, choosing the right resources and also automating processes so that they stay protected, we've got the resources and their capabilities on the one hand, and then we've got workflows and processes. So you got the system, the service itself, which does something or other, but then there's also how it would operate over time. And well, there are really different ways of doing this. And I think the traditional way of doing this, and people who have started off in AWS in the early years, this is how they used to do it. They would get tools that multiple tools for managing the different resources, but they would also have to have the expertise. They would have to have people on the team who are familiar with the configuration and the limitations of each one of these resources. So in AWS, it's kind of like you've got these lots of services that you're kind of building together, but you do need the understanding. And this approach, in order to get the workflows and processes, would require a lot of people and a lot of time. Now, what we're going to talk about is the new approach, which is much more common today, which is to find specific services in AWS that include building blocks. So it's not a service with a single purpose, but rather a service that can provide lots of different options for deployment and configuration, depending on your needs, and attaching that with an orchestration tool which knows how to adapt these building blocks to whatever it is you need. So you've got the building blocks, and then you've got the orchestration or the organization of these building blocks. This is how I want to refer to the products that we're presenting in this session. So FSx for ONTAP, as I mentioned, it's it's a storage service, but it's not just a storage service. It has features within it for data protection, data security, data mobility. It's got all these things that are often offered as an external service, and these are all built in. So there are a lot of building blocks in this system. And then we've got something which is called Workload Factory, which is an orchestration tool that was developed by NetApp, which um, can orchestrate these features in Workload Factory in FSx for ONTAP. So if FSx for ONTAP has the features for cost, performance, and security and protection, accessibility and mobility, Workload Factory would be a set of tools for planning when you're in the planning stage, for deploying these features, and for operating it on an ongoing basis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through examples showing how these building blocks in FSx for ONTAP can be implemented using Workload Factory. And I just need to mention here that Workload Factory it's a free orchestration tool. So it has the best practices inside it for planning, deploying, and operating, but it's not something additional that you need to purchase. If you have FSx for ONTAP, you can start using Workload Factory for free, and it doesn't add any additional cost. In fact, often it saves costs. So
Wait, but Robert, sometimes people are a bit apprehensive about the permission sets, entering the third party tool. What permission sets do you need just to start with Workload Factory? For example, just to gauge, to use the TCO calculator, for example.
Yeah, well, there is some of the features within Workload Factory you can actually use. You just have to sign in, create a free account, and you can use these, and you can actually get quite a lot of value out of it without actually connecting it to anything, just using it as a free tool. But obviously, if you want to start using it to deploy or to operate systems, then you need to give it certain permissions, which again, it doesn't change the cost. It doesn't have any additional costs. It's just a matter of adding the credentials to Workload Factory so that it can do the operations that you choose to do, so that just to simplify things.
I think it's worth mentioning is that you can do a gradual process. You can start without giving any permissions to use TCO calculators and to plan without showing your resources. And then if you want to take a step further, you could put in read-only credentials for some of the features. And when you have better confidence and you're ready to deploy with Workload Factory, letting Workload Factory do the heavy lifting of actually deploying the plan that you prepared, only then you can start giving read-write permissions, of course, the minimal permissions that you need for the project. And once you've got the confidence and you're ready to work in that Workload Factory, do the hard work for you, you can give the permissions at your own pace. And once again, as Robert said, the best part, it's absolutely free.
So we're going to see it in action, and this is sort of like I think this is an example. I've seen this many times because our team has accompanied a lot of companies that have been moving from on-premises to AWS, and we've seen the different things that they struggle with. And this is really based on the common things that we just see repetitively, and the things that are often challenging. So in this example, we're just going to take something very simple here. It's a global company that has data centers around the world, and they want to create, as part of their migration or part of their cloud strategy, they want to create a company-wide shared data set in AWS for departmental shares. So you would have like different departments, each having their own area where they can store the files. Some of these files would have to be moved from on-premises, and some of them will be created in AWS as new storage where they can store files and run applications. So I'd like to show a demonstration of this, but again, to keep you all alert, we want to keep you involved and ask you questions. So yeah, this next question is, what is your top priority when you're running workloads in AWS? Cost efficiency, high performance, high availability, and data protection and security.
So what are your guesses for the results, Robert? I have my own guess.
I got a feeling that it's around data protection and security because that's, well, often that's kind of like a must. You're not going to move your data to a new environment if you need it to be very protected and secure. I would say that, but sometimes it's performance, sometimes it's, well, availability. Really, I think it really does depend on the type of service, but my guess would be data protection security.
So my guess is we'll see an even split, but with a little bit of advantage to cost efficiency and data protection and security. And my reason for that is that typically you need to satisfy this in our line of work, you need to satisfy the CFO and the CISO. For one reason, for example, you can't sell any service or product in the software industry without, the blessing of the security team.
Yeah.
If it's not, even if the business users want it, if it's not secured, you're not getting it. And on the other hand, we all work, especially in this economy, we all have to work in a budget. And that means we
You're
can't.
talking from experience, right? You've actually been in that situation in
Yeah,
the
so
past.
before working at NetApp, I was working at this software vendor, working with having software solutions, software as a service for insurance companies and banks, and getting the buy-in from the business analysts or the pricing teams or whoever wanted to use our product. They're not technical people, they're professionals. It was all well and good, but what kept the sales cycle could not move forward unless you have the stamp of approval from the security team. And of course, you want to be cost efficient, so your profit margins are higher. Or maybe you can even push the savings to the customer, lower prices. And as we can see, I see that indeed, now that Liat is paging me, that we have the results of the poll. I can see that we've got number one is, as Robert expected, data protection and security with 38%. Right after it, cost efficiency with 31%, then high performance 19%, and cost availability with 13%.
Yeah. So it's as we guessed. And what I want to show now is really, let's just take this customer and we'll sort of walk them through. Like I said, it's a simplified version. Obviously, there is many steps you have to do, which we can't cover in this session. But the first step is planning how you would deploy the file system in AWS. And then following that, you would do the provisioning and then the ongoing operations. So for the planning stage, usually you would want to have the same, or at least the same level of resilience that you have on premises if you're going to be migrating data from there. You don't want to have a negative impact on protection and security. So this is something that's very important, meaning that you would want the same resilience, the same RTO,
Robert, I'm
RPO, things like that.
sorry that I'm stopping you. I see people in the audience raising their hands. If you raise your hand and you're listening and you have a question, please post it in the Q&A part, and one of us chat responders will be very happy to answer the question. Sorry to interrupt, Robert. Go ahead.
So let's see how we would do this planning stage with Workload Factory. So we're planning to use FSx for ONTAP in AWS as a shared storage service. So what we would do, we would go into Workload Factory, and it's a browser-based service. So you just, we'll give you the link so you could try it out yourself. But once you go inside, you see the home screen of Workload Factory. Again, you have to just sign up for a free account. And in the first stage, you really don't have to add any credentials or anything. It's really, you can just start working with that. So what you would do if you're in the planning stage and you knew what it is that you were planning to deploy, you would go into the Explore Savings and choose one of the options here. You would write your use case, which could be different use cases, and obviously there'd be different configurations for this. We would choose departmental file shares. Well, all you have to do is add the storage capacity that is required. You would also write the throughput, because these are things that would affect the cost and performance. And then you get, first of all, a very quick view of how much it would cost, also how it would cost compared to alternative services, and a breakdown of this cost, why it would cost that much, in a way that you could understand exactly how the system that would be deployed will be configured. So this is something that you can actually take this information, you can download a copy of this, and you can actually review it. Maybe if it needs any kind of approval, you can get approval, but it would really have a very, very detailed breakdown exactly of how this will be deployed based on what you chose. Obviously, for the different use cases, you would get a different configuration. But the cool thing here is that you don't need to be an expert on FSx for ONTAP to deploy it well. Workload Factory has all of these best practices from the AWS well-architected framework built into it, so that once you've chosen something, it will optimize it according to those best practices. So and what we often see in this case is that by using this TCO calculator, not only can you get an optimal performance for the deployment, but also you can save a lot of costs by doing that. So this is a short demo of the planning stage. And like I said, you don't need to add any credentials for that. So in this case, we saw that the building blocks that would be used in this case would be the storage efficiencies that FSx for ONTAP has. It has ways of using less space, putting more data in less space, and also reducing the cost of data in an intelligent way. And it can also be adapted to multiple use cases. Obviously, if this is something that requires very high performance, it will be different from something that is just maybe a backup or a disaster recovery side. And then on the well-architected orchestration side, that's Workload Factory. You've got a simple and fast planning tool that you can use, but it gives you a detailed configuration explanation, which is not only just something that you can review and approve, but also you can use that as the template for deploying later. Now, what I said about multiple use cases, I showed the example of the departmental file shares, but obviously there are more. So you can choose archive, you can choose engineering data where you would have in lots of multiple environments where you're cloning information. You could do databases, which is usually a more high performance, and VMware data store. So really for different types of use cases, you can choose in these calculators and in the deployment tools to get the required results. Again, it saves time, it saves the need to have experts who are familiar with all of the different configurations, and obviously it saves costs. Now, the next step is the planning phase. So let's say we've decided to go ahead with this. We got approval from both the CFO and the CSO. And now we want to replicate certain volumes from on-premises and also enable multiple operating systems. Now, this is something that often you have this challenge because a lot of the services are either NFS for Linux or SMB for Windows, whereas FSx for ONTAP can support NFS and SMB. It can support Linux and Windows access to the same directory. It's multi-protocol, and this is something that's very useful in many cases because you don't have to duplicate any information. So let's see how this would work in Workload Factory. And again, it's here we're starting from scratch. So in this case, I would need to add the credentials so that Workload Factory can access my environment. Again, it has access for being able to deploy the system. So here I would analyze the on-premises system. And if I've got ONTAP on-premises, I would see those systems. And then I can choose to replicate a certain system to FSx in AWS. So if I choose the FSx system I want to replicate to, I would create the volume. And here it's, again, I'll just stop this for a second. There's also the issue of choosing whether you're migrating or you're doing archive or disaster recovery. So these are things that the tool lets you do. Sorry, let's move forward. Here, migration, hot disaster recovery, cold disaster recovery. So basically it will adapt the settings according to the type of replication I'm doing here. Now, what you can see on the right side of the screen is a code box. And this code box, everything I'm configuring, everything I choose in Workload Factory is created as a script. And I can choose whether it's an API request, or I can do that on Terraform or CloudFormation. So depending on which tool I want to use, whether it's Workload Factory or other tools, I can choose. I don't have to deploy on Workload Factory. I can just copy the script and run it separately. So if I do create the system, it will be created, and then I would go to this same, the system was created. I can create another volume, an additional volume. So this would be replicating data from on-premises, and I would, here in this case, I'm making a volume for the finance department, which is a new volume. I can decide how big it is. And again, it's a matter of choosing the configurations. Now, I mentioned storage efficiencies before. So these are things that during the configuration, it lets you choose. So you've got storage efficiency enables. That means it will optimize the storage. You can set the snapshot policy for protection. You can create immutable files. There are all of these things which are possible to do while you're deploying, so that you can meet the exact requirements of the deployment, so that the level of data protection and security will be the same as on premises. So again, after creating this, I can choose to create it here. I can choose Terraform, for example, and that will be an example of the deployment. Now, I want to move on to the next stage. So just to summarize this, in this case, the building blocks in this case that we use would be like multi-protocol access, the ability to have a volume that has multiple access, the data mobility support, which allows us to move data from on-premises to FSX or from one FSX to another. But then the well-orchestrated, the well-architected orchestration, the Workload Factory, has these migration wizards that have the best practices built in, and a deployment tool with infrastructure as code. And just about the data mobility, that would include data mirroring. So I can, for example, I can create a mirror copy of the data in a different place. Then I would have two identical systems, or I can do cloning, and that's more for development purposes, where I create a copy which is separate from the other. And I can also do caching, which is just a cost-effective way to create a copy, a remote copy that can be used for different purposes, but doesn't require the full cost of copying the data. So these are features that FSX for ONTAP supports, and it can be implemented using Workload Factory. So before we go on to the final stage, we wanted to ask you another question. So here comes the third poll. And this poll is about, I think once you've got everything up and running, then it's not over. Then the users start using the information, the infrastructure. And even if you planned it perfectly, things can change. You can get maybe more data than you expected you get, or higher performance requirements, or just things that are just not working properly. And what we'd like to ask you is, if you have an infrastructure in AWS, how would you know whether it or not it's optimized? What would be the trigger for knowing that something is wrong?
Well, I certainly hope for our customers' sake, for our listeners' sake, that the fourth option is the most popular one, that my infrastructure is continuously monitored. Sometimes we know from our own past experience, sometimes the red flags that appear if our infrastructure is not monitored, or if it's not monitored correctly, then we will, first of all, usually the first one is user reporting issues. Then we, for some reason, increase performance typically, and then the costs rise, etc. Maybe they cost unnecessarily.
Yeah. And that's
So
interesting. Yeah. I was going to say that I think that that the answer would probably, even though a lot of companies are monitoring, the answer is often that the costs are are high. And you know what? Sometimes you've done everything right, but you still get complaints that the costs are high, and that's because, well, the costs, I think every company, when they start looking at the costs, they say, okay, this is too much. You need to reduce, even if everything is exactly how you expected it. There's always a need to cut down on the costs.
yeah,
And
and there's always a tendency, I think, on the other hand, to over provision. So
yeah, yeah,
we want to avoid users reporting issues like the plague, typically. Um, and typically, at least from my experience, you over provision, you build you build a very good technical, a very highly provisioned technical stack. You get the customers very happy, especially in the early stages, the POC or right after delivering an environment. And only later, when you accumulate costs and deliver many customer environments, then the costs come and bite your backside. So I think that's
and I think the psychology behind that is that if I'm a developer and I'm working on a project and the cloud architects ask me like what my requirements are, I think I would exaggerate. I think I would say I would ask for more capacity and more performance than I actually need because I want to be on the safe side. So I think it's given that, with this over provisioning, you're going to be deploying something, and it could be that if you monitor your system, you'll see that actually you're not really utilizing everything you have. So this is an important thing to know about, and this is the third step. And this is, I think, one of the benefits of using an orchestration tool like Workload Factory is that it doesn't just help you plan and deploy, but it checks that you deployed according to best practices, but it checks that you still aligned with these best practices. It could be that there's been a drift. Maybe the nature of the usage of your infrastructure has changed and it needs to be adapted to, or maybe it's just the natural, like I said, the psychology of over provisioning. So in this case, we want to be watching everything and knowing what optimized is and comparing to an optimized system. So again, this is something I would do from within Workload Factory, where I would actually go to the storage. I would see my systems. I get an overview of how well architected this is. And here it's 71%. I can see for this specific FSX that I deployed, which areas need to be improved. Cost optimization in this case is high, but the reliability and operational excellence is low. I would get configurations that could be fixed. In this case, it says, okay, in this case, I would be required to change the, let's say, the percentage in which it increases the capacity. Or let's say if I click on the fix, it will actually do this for me. And then I go into the system itself. I go into manage system. What I see here, when I look at the system itself and I go to well-architected status, see now it's gone up to 86%, I can see the different configurations, and I will get lots of recommendations because Workload Factory is looking at this and saying, what needs to be updated. So in this case, it says the finance volume that I created, it needs remote data replication. And then if I click fix, it takes me to the screen in which I can deploy that. That would be in the area of data protection. So it's cost optimization, performance, and data protection. All of those things are monitored and recommendations are given. So again, this is a very simplified version of what would normally be going on, but on a regular basis, if you go into this well-architected dashboard, you would get recommendations. It's actually something that is constantly being updated. So every time there are new best practices that come out from AWS, we'll implement those in Workload Factory. So here you've got features like performance and capacity scalability, the fact that the ability to change your performance and capacity based on evolving needs, and the data protection capabilities which can be implemented. Sometimes a new security feature comes out, but the previous systems that you deploy don't have that feature implemented. So Workload Factory will find those systems and say, you need to add this additional security to this specific volume, and with a simple click, you can do that. So Workload Factory is giving you drift detection and analysis, finding where your current implementation differs from what you planned or what the best practices recommend, and quick fix buttons for remediation. And again, here we're talking about some very, very unique features like local snapshots, which don't take up any space. This is something that is unique for ONTAP, and FSx for ONTAP has this feature. When you create snapshots, it doesn't take up any space and it's instant. So you can really do it freely without worrying about additional costs. There is the backup and restore, which is built in, and disaster recovery, where you can create a mirror of the system in a different region. So if there's any kind of natural disaster and you need to get up and running instantly or as soon as possible from a different region, you can do that with this disaster recovery feature. So these are the 3 stages: planning, provisioning, and operating. And we've got these different building block tools that we saw some of the examples here. We got Workload Factory, which has the calculators, advisors, wizards, and dashboards for implementing these building blocks and automating the workflows throughout the planning, provisioning, and operating stage. So at this point, I will see if there's any questions. So anyone who has any questions, I don't know if there were any in the chat.
I think we answered, I think Aviv answered the questions in the chat. I don't see any further questions. Once again, if you still have questions, you'll feel free to write them now while we're here. If not, I think in the meantime, we can go to the resources page.
Yeah, and really this was just a snapshot of what you can do with FSx for ONTAP and Workload Factory together. And as I said, it's something that does a lot of the work for you. So if you are you want to do things right without actually having to become an expert, this is really useful. And I think that one of the advantages of Workload Factory is that it does explain what it's doing. So you're not just going to be clicking things randomly. There are always these little information buttons which explain exactly what's going to happen when you deploy it. Plus, you have the infrastructure as code script. So if you're familiar with infrastructure as code, you can actually see the specific commands that are going to be run automatically in the background. So I really do encourage you to try it out, even if it's just playing around with a TCO calculator, which you can do without giving it any credentials. It's definitely worthwhile. There's a lot of resources around this, and we also have a QR code. So if you want to actually start right now, this QR code will link you to the console page of Workload Factory, where you can create your free account, or if you have an account, you can sign in and start playing around with it. Again, it's something that doesn't, it's pretty straightforward. The things that we showed, like explore savings, things like that, you could play around with it. And obviously, if you need any additional help, you can contact us, or you can look at the resources that we shared. And
okay, so first of all, I want to say we have a few questions now in the Q&A section, and some people who raised their hand. So if you raised your hand and didn't ask in the Q&A, now's your chance. So I see Aviv is already typing one as we speak. So maybe we'll answer maybe other. Okay, so first of all, we've got a question. Do you have any monitoring solution for Amazon FSx for ONTAP? I see Aviv is answering that. The answer is so. In addition to what you've got in CloudWatch, there's also within Workload Factory, I think you can use the well-architected dashboard as a way of monitoring some of the issues or solving them automatically. I'll also let Aviv answer that. I'm sure he'll give you a fuller answer than that. What other questions?
In general, if you're using CloudWatch, then yeah, that's Workload Factory will, FSx for ONTAP can be monitored through CloudWatch. And yeah, if you're using Workload Factory, then you can see in the well-architected dashboards, you can see a lot of information around the system. I think the advantage of doing it through Workload Factory is if there is an issue, you can fix it directly from the console itself, assuming that you've already given the...
Yeah, you've got, I think I would say we've got actionable warnings and actual warnings that you can use, but at least at the beginning. I had another question that I wanted to raise here. There was a question about the permissions needed to give into Workload Factory. I was talking about AWS IAM permissions. Currently, the permission set given for FSx is only what you get from Amazon. Do remember FSx for ONTAP, although you have access to the CLI, etc. It is a managed service. So the ONTAP user you get is a super user. It's not an ONTAP admin, but that's essentially what you get. And you don't, at least at first, you don't have, for most actions, you don't need to give us the ONTAP credentials. But for some actions, for some advanced actions that are not available in the AWS console, you are required to prompt the ONTAP credentials, but that is at a later stage. Another question that we had in regarding the there's a good one. First of all, Aviv shared a link regarding the monitoring solution. I will paste Aviv's answer on Liat. I think you'll have to paste it in the chat because I can't send it to everyone. And another question was, can you shrink a file system using Workload Factory? Essentially, through Workload Factory, yes, that's something relatively new. With newer FSx for ONTAP from the second generation, you can use SSD shrink, meaning you can decrease the amount of SSD of the SSDs that you have underlying the FSx for ONTAP file system. So that's relatively new. It wasn't there in the previous years. I don't know if you had previous POCs or dealing with this. Relatively new feature, and it can be done via the UI for Workload Factory. If you have to rely only on the console, on the AWS console or the CLI commands, so you can't do it with the AWS console, maybe with the CLI commands, but that's a bit of a hassle. But Workload Factory have a solution, and I think I made a short YouTube video on how to do that. You can check it out at our YouTube channel. And I think with that, I think we've answered all our questions. And any closing words, Robert?
No, I just want to thank everybody for joining and for your attention. And as Danny mentioned, if any of you are going to reInvent this year, then Aviv, the guy, our great friend who has been answering all the difficult questions, will be able to answer difficult questions at reInvent too. We'll have a booth there. And again, thanks for joining, and give it a try. Check out Workload Factory and see if it suits your requirements.
So once again, thank you all for coming. Thank you for asking questions. It always makes the end answering the polls make these webinars a lot more engaging. And a reminder, if you're visiting reInvent, do pop by and say hello to Aviv, who will be representing us there. And with that, I think we'll close this webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you, Liat, for moderating.
Thanks, Aviv.
And thanks a lot, Aviv, for answering the questions while we were talking. Thank you and have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.